Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, the growing cost of living. An economist adds up the reasons grocery prices in New Mexico are so high. And
we are taking a really cautious approach, and we would advocate that everybody take a cautious approach.
Forecasting fire danger. Two heads of the State Forestry Division give Our Land's Laura Paskus a preview of what this year's fire season could look like. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm senior producer Lou DeVizio. A new report from Health Advisor shows New Mexico is one of the top 10 most expensive states to buy groceries. In the first half of today's show, we sit down with Dr. James Peach, a retired economics professor from New Mexico State University, and ask why nationwide prices in the checkout line have most hurt Hispanic and Latino American communities. And later, Sonia Warwick from Roadrunner Food Bank tells us about the increased need they're seeing as food costs continue to rise. We also return tonight to the second half of our conversation between executive producer Jeff Proctor and Alexander Ubaez, U.S. Attorney for the District of New Mexico. In just over 15 minutes, Jeff asks how the federal investigation into alleged corruption at the Albuquerque Police Department could impact the ongoing federally mandated reform effort. Plus, Ubaez tells us if we should expect public closure in the high-profile case, regardless of its outcome. But first, it's springtime in New Mexico. That means warmer temperatures, winds, and the start of fire season. This week, Our Land senior producer Laura Paskus sits down with the heads of the New Mexico State Forestry Division to talk about this year's outlook, climate change, and why fire plays a vital part in a forest structure.
Laura McCarthy, Lindsay Kwan, thanks for joining me today.
Yes.
Good to be here.
So it's only March, but we need to have this conversation earlier every year. What is the outlook for New Mexico's fire season this year?
So probably first of mind is what happened in Texas last week and the speed at which that grass fire got really big and dangerous. And so there are parts of New Mexico right now where that kind of fire could have happened here. And on a red flag day, like the day when that fire took off, we could have experienced that same fire behavior. At the same time, there are also other parts of the state, especially the northern mountains, that have a pretty high snowpack, more than average. And while that's great, we also know that with climate change and the warming temperatures, that snow is going to disappear a lot faster than it used to. So that's kind of part one, is what is our current condition. The forecast does have in it that the El Nino is weakening, and there's the possibility of La Nina returning. And so we don't know exactly what that's going to mean for us. We are anticipating that there will be a green up this spring, that there is enough moisture for that. And that right away separates it from 2022, when it was just so dry that there was no green up. But after the green up, everything's going to dry out in June, and we don't know when the monsoon will hit and what kind of strength it will have, and this transition from El Nino to La Nina does affect whether we have a monsoon at all and its strength. So we are taking a really cautious approach, and we would advocate that everybody take a cautious approach. As well, we've already had several red flag days, and so the windiness is going to make a really big difference to how long the snowpack lasts and then how quickly things dry out. Yeah. That's my perspective. I'm sure Lindsay can add to this.
I think Laura covered it well, but yeah, I think really the impacts for the monsoon season could be significant depending on whether or not it's delayed, if it comes on early. I think some of the predictions are that it may come on a little later, but could potentially be significant in the terms of moisture. Crapshoot in a way.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate for our audience that state forestry is different from the U.S. Forest Service. But I do want to talk about what lessons we've learned since 2022. I guess we'll start with you, Lindsay.
I think for us, some of the most significant lessons we learned were being cautious with prescribed burning, but still understanding that it's a significant resource and benefit to forests. Also communicating with our partners, Forest Service being one of them, having better communication, having better pre-season communication, but just communication in general throughout the year on actions, on projects, on planning, implementation, and then also communicating with some of our other state partners too, I think was the biggest thing too that we learned from that. So communication all across the board with people and other agencies that are involved in either wildland response or some type of emergency response. And I think Laura may elaborate more on that.
Well, you mentioned that the State Forestry Division is not the U.S. Forest Service, and I think that's also connected to one of our lessons. So our agency is part of the state's Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, and we've been around since 1957 with jurisdiction primarily for wildland fire suppression on the state and private lands, which is 43 million acres. And we've been trying to do that with a full-time staff of 80, low 80s positions. And that's not enough. So one of our lessons was that we need to build state capacity to respond to the state and private fires and to support the federal agencies with local crews that can be on scene very quickly. And the legislature heard that need and saw the emerging lesson and gave us 50 positions in the 2023 legislative session, which are now should be fully staffed for our fire season ahead. And so I think that's a really important lesson and change.
And so does New Mexico have its own hotshot crew now, is that right?
So yes, and hotshot has a couple of different meanings. And one of its meanings is to be a type 1 crew under the national standards set by the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. So while our intention with the new positions is to create 2 hotshot crews for New Mexico that meet that type 1 standard, we aren't going to be able to hire them out of the box. It's going to take about 3 years, maybe as much as 5 years, to fully develop that type 1 elite level capacity. But the good news is that we have a lot of excitement around it, and we will be able to fill as a type 2 crew from day one. And so they'll be gaining the experience over this time period so that hopefully in 3 years they are qualified as a type 1 crew.
Okay. So we've done some shows and had conversations about prescribed fire with you in the past, as well as with the Forest Service. And, you know, one of the questions when I'm like meeting with the public or whatever, everybody wants to ask me what I think of prescribed fire, if I trust the agencies, if I trust prescribed fire. And I'm interested, in light of kind of a betrayal of trust, I think that happened on the part of the U.S. Forest Service. People have a lot of resistance to prescribed fire in New Mexico. And I would love for each of you to talk about prescribed fire as a tool and its necessity, and also maybe how we've changed, or talk about changing how we use prescribed fire. Lindsay, if you want to start.
Sure. So really in the historical sense with our Western forests, I mean, fire was a vital piece and is a vital piece to the structure and composition of our forests. I mean, it's because of taking that vital piece out is why we have the conditions that we're facing right now, and why our forests aren't healthy and overloaded, and why there's a drastic need to get it back to some type of functioning system. And again, when you take a vital piece out of any component, it's not going to operate properly, and you have cascading effects. And that's what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with about 100+ years of fire suppression and removing fire out of that essential system. So forests don't know how to adapt to it. And so we're forced with having to help manage that adaptation, but we need to include that vital piece to help us help the forest. And a lot of it, I think, falls into branding in a way of promoting good fire and the benefits of fire. I think in general the public understands the importance of it, but there's also certain portions of the public, I think in my opinion, that still hang on to the Smokey Bear legacy and the messaging behind Smokey Bear, and that all fires are bad. And I think it's that's harder to overcome. And then some of the others that are against fire per se and larger scale use of it is the health benefits or the health risks that may be associated with smoke. And so I think part of what we could do better is also messaging some of the facts behind prescribed smoke versus wildfire smoke, and how the benefits that come from prescribed burning in terms of management of forests, management of fuels, how it reduces risks to wild-urban interface and communities, and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to what Lindsay said, I want to talk a little bit about culture and climate. So on the culture side, I think that, and this is based on my own experience, there is a firefighting culture that is has a lot of bravado to it, and it's been long-standing. Our state agency has not been immune to it. It's well documented in the Forest Service as to an arrogance and sometimes toxicity within the firefighting culture. And I think it really affects decision making when it comes to making that we've got everything lined up for go. And Lindsay and I jointly, as state forester and deputy, have worked really hard on changing our organizational culture, both on the firefighting for our firefighters, but also for all of our employees. And it's been a 4-year effort that's really bearing fruit now. And some of that is humility and a core value of learning from mistakes, and kind of a fail forward sort of attitude. But with prescribed burning, you can't really afford a fail, but you do need to be constantly learning. So a culture of learning, a culture of question asking where it's safe to do that. Then there's the climate effects. And my view on the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon is that the soil was so unbelievably dry from that extended La Nina. I think there were 2 growing seasons in La Nina plus the winters, that there were changes, physiological changes in the vegetation that weren't being measured and that the people doing the igniting and the test fires weren't conscious of. And that connects to our culture, because if, as Lindsay said, the science is clear that we have to put fire back on the land if we're going to have forests at all. Otherwise, the climate will just take care of them and they'll disappear over centuries. But if we want to maintain our forests with fire, then we have to learn to be more sensitive to how the climate is interacting with the forest itself, but not just the vegetation. What's happening in the soil really matters, especially on those pile burns with the sleeper fires.
Hunger is a symptom of poverty, right? You know, they go simultaneously. If you have high rates of poverty, you have high rates of hunger. And it means that we need to do what we have to do as a state to lift people up into that. That can be anything from making sure we're paying living wages to things like we're providing excellent education opportunities for people who are low income. And I think in a state like ours, because of our rural nature and the fact that we have such large spaces in between communities, that can be a tough thing when you're in a small town community and there may not be a lot of higher earning jobs available to you.
That interview with Sonia Warwick of Roadrunner Food Bank is coming up in about 20 minutes. And we'll hear more from Laura and the heads of state forestry later in the show. Right now, we pick up where we left off in executive producer Jeff Proctor's interview with U.S. Attorney Alexander Ubaez. Last week on the show, Ubaez explained why he decided to notify the public about his office's investigation into alleged corruption within APD's DWI unit. This week, Jeff asks Ubaez if U.S. attorneys owe the public a sense of closure when such a high-profile case eventually comes to an end.
The message to the public from your office, from the city of Albuquerque, has been that we are this close to ending a decade of federal oversight for the Albuquerque Police Department. There's been quite a bit of speculation in the vacuum of silence since news of this investigation broke about whether this could impact the consent decree. Of course, one of the things the Justice Department found when they looked into APD was a total lack of internal controls. The Internal Affairs Division was not functioning. They couldn't police themselves. We are now reading stories in the newspaper that you've got a couple of internal affairs supervisors on leave now in connection with this investigation. My first question is this: when I read that 8th section of the consent decree that talks about complaint intake, complaint investigation, it seems to me that it is not directly just connected to use of force. Do I have that right?
I think you're right. I wasn't involved in the original charging or investigation, the consent agreement, but my read of it is that it went far beyond, in a good and aspirational way, the actual investigation and findings during the investigation of the Albuquerque Police Department. In doing so, the Albuquerque Police Department, Albuquerque City, crafted this really, truly aspirational consent agreements that they hoped that their department would live up to. It involved many things that weren't included in the initial investigation or findings. But I do think, I will say, and I don't know what's going to happen in court. I don't know, what the parties are going to move for. I don't know what the court is going to find. But I do think that for any police department, especially ours, a functioning internal affairs department is critical to the administration of that department. And so I would guess that a functioning internal affairs department is what the city will receive after this investigation plays out.
Is your office reviewing, how to ask this, is your office reviewing anything in connection with this investigation that could impact the conclusion of the consent decree?
I don't think I can speak to that.
Okay. Okay. Moving away from the impact that this might have on the consent decree, in high-profile investigations like this one, who makes the ultimate decision on whether to charge?
Sure. It depends. Most decisions, most criminal charging decisions, in fact, all criminal charging decisions are approved by the United States Attorney for any given district. And every single criminal indictment, and we issue many every week, every month, we hold a screening committee where all of our management and myself read every single indictment, every single prosecution memorandum, which details a case, its elements, its the facts and witnesses, weaknesses, and constitutionality. And in doing that, we approve or we don't every single criminal indictment that comes in this district. For vast majority of cases, the final authority lies with me. There are some exceptions, though, and exceptions are what we do as lawyers. Throughout the Justice Manual, which is a document that has been created over the years for procedures for federal prosecutors and Department of Justice prosecutors to follow, it outlines there are several carve-outs there for where responsibility could lie. In certain areas that are a little bit more, that may have more national interest, areas that might have, that may be a specifically tricky statute. There are other authorities that go to Main Justice and the criminal division up there for them to have a say or the final say. This happens both in the criminal and civil side. Sometimes I'll have authority, sometimes the authority will be vested up there, and of course, the final authority is always the boss, the Attorney General. Right. But there are some cases, I'll give you an example of when we use RICO or Vicar type criminal charges. There are some cases there where we have to go actually to Main Justice, go to the criminal division, consult with them and get approval on using those charges here in the state. And so the answer is sometimes it's here, most of the time it's here. Sometimes there's authorities in Washington, D.C.
Gotcha. I have seen a number of federal investigations of local law enforcement in the decades that I have been doing this, and I've seen examples of cases where I was able to confirm that an investigation did exist. It did not end in an indictment. There were no handcuffs. There were no perp walks. But nothing was ever said again about the conclusion of a couple of those investigations. I'm thinking specifically about allegations that officers were tampering with body camera video and shootings. I know there were investigations, but there was never any sort of an announcement at the end that the investigation had concluded. Mm-hmm. You and I spoke some before we sat down today about an op-ed that Preet Bharara, the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, wrote, sort of pushing for a little bit more transparency on the back end of investigations that don't end in indictment or charges. I'm curious how that op-ed struck you and whether there is a conversation among U.S. attorneys in this country to maybe provide a little bit more closure at the end of these.
Sure. And there's initially a distinction I want to draw at the top, which is there's a difference, I think, between, and it gets a little conflated in this discussion, notice to the public, right, and notice to a potential target. Right, and so I think, Preet in his op-ed talks a little bit about the anxiety that a potential target might be feeling. But I think that is a separate equity than that of the public in knowing whether or not something's happening or not happening, right? And so I think in thinking about, our practice here, I don't have, and I probably should have run some numbers, but in my experience, this plays out in a couple different ways. And the first thing that came to my mind was this. We have a special responsibility here when we serve Indian country, right? And so we have 22 tribes and pueblos here in the state of New Mexico. We have a special trust responsibility as the federal government to them. And as a component of that, we issue declination letters, which is a letter that's saying we've reviewed the case and we are not charging, right? This gives finality to the tribe to whom we issue these notices about what has happened with the case or not happened. So it serves some of those equities in a very direct but unique way for in New Mexico and those who serve tribal territories. And looking through the Justice Manual that I referred to earlier, there's a couple different areas where that discuss whether or not we talk about a decision not to go forward against a target with the target themselves. And I think again this will highlight the equities I discussed at the beginning. So in some criminal and civil rights investigations, we are actually encouraged to give the public notice about what has happened. And equity protected there, of course, is the public's interest, because, especially in the case of police officers that are specifically identified, or law enforcement officers. And the reason there, right, is to step back, is the trust of the public in their institutions, that the people policing their streets and who are supposed to keep them safe are doing their job and doing it constitutionally. And so the Justice Manual and generations of U.S. attorneys have identified the need in those cases specifically for us to interface with the public about it. There's another section that gives us the authorization to do so. I think Preet may have referred to it. obliquely in his piece. And it says that we have the discretion, we U.S. attorneys, have the discretion to let a target know that they are no longer a target. And it gives a couple steps of analysis. I think the first one, obviously, is a case where the person being investigated knows they're being investigated. Yeah. Right? There's no world in which we're going to go out and knock on someone's door and be like, hey, we investigated you for 2 years, but you're good. Right? And so the person has to know they're being investigated. And second, we have to know that we are discontinuing the investigation of them without an indictment or charge, or that they're being exonerated. And so we've discovered evidence that says that they are not guilty or they're innocent of the crime. And so looking at these circumstances, and I'll throw in one final caveat before I talk about it a little bit. So the final caveat is this. As federal prosecutors, we're distinct from state prosecutors, right? We're distinct from the state law enforcement system. A state prosecutor, a district attorney, they have the responsibility to charge the crimes in their jurisdiction. There's nobody else charging the crimes, right? Every crime that we charge as federal prosecutors, as outlined by the Justice Manual, is a policy decision, right? Every time we bring in indictments, a criminal charge, we of course begin saying, did a crime occur? Was it constitutional? Can we prove this to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt? Those are our baselines. But after that, the analysis we do in every single case is as a policy matter. Is this best charged federally? Which means, are there other alternatives to criminal charging? Are there other jurisdictions who could handle this? Is there a substantial federal interest in doing what we are doing? And so not bringing a federal indictment isn't necessarily a clearing of a person's name. And I think finally, and most interestingly for me, is, Preet puts in this, he acknowledges, right, an exception that I feel almost eats the rule here, which is we can always say in a letter exonerating somebody, saying, we are not going forward on this investigation that is happening of you, but we could always go forward later. And so that, while I understand it, right, and while it's persuasive to me that people want finality, I don't know that this letter is proposed saying, we're not doing it now, but we could do it any other time, up into the statute of limitations, which is going to run in any case, right? I don't know that that solves the problem.
Interesting. My last question is this. Should folks here expect some public closure in this case, regardless of its outcome?
Folks should expect public closure.
Alex, thanks so much for coming down today. I really appreciate the chat.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
Thank you to U.S. Attorney Ubaez for making the time to shed some light on how he makes decisions in cases like this one. You can watch Jeff's entire interview online right now on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page or on the PBS app. Nationwide inflation has dropped to its lowest point in 3 years this month, falling to just under 3.1% according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's down from its peak of over 9% in June of 2022. But why are so many of us still wincing as we roll our carts through the grocery store? I try to answer that question in our next segment with retired New Mexico State University economics professor, Dr. James Peach. Dr. James Peach, thank you so much for joining me here today on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, I want to talk about grocery prices and something that we've all experienced, the seemingly endless increase at grocery chains around the state. I just wanted to establish right off the bat before we get into specifics, we aren't crazy, right? Prices are continuing to go up even now.
Yes. In fact, this morning there was a new release of the Consumer Price Index. Surprisingly, food was not one of the major items that was increasing. It was mainly gasoline, transportation, and housing.
Okay.
Food was relatively flat.
That's something that I want to get into in terms of pricing versus inflation, but let's start with inflation specifically. We know it's down from its highs a couple years ago, but prices are still high. So can you explain exactly what inflation is first and what influences that number that we see right around 3% right now?
Yes. The easiest way to look at it is to think of a shopping cart and you go into the grocery store and you buy 15 or 20 items, and you come back, you know the price of that basket. You come back a month or a year later, you buy exactly those same items again and see whether the price has gone up or down. If it's gone up, that would be inflation. But add to the basket all of the other things it's like shelter and transportation and entertainment, even barbershops and the like. And so it's a basket of goods, and inflation occurs when that basket of goods and services increases in price. It's not just one item.
Okay, and not just one industry either.
And not just one industry.
Understood. So with inflation cooling and focusing in on that one specific industry of grocery prices right now, broadly speaking, what factors impact those prices at the grocery store, even when inflation is dropping?
It's not an easy question to answer because there are multiple things.
Okay.
For farm produce, for example, when energy prices increase, those costs to the farmer have to be passed along to the consumer. So energy is a big deal in the agricultural industry.
Now, within a grocery store, are there any specific items, like we've seen the fluctuation of egg prices, for example? How do those more volatile items influence the overall pricing within a grocery store, or is it mostly separate?
It's separate.
Okay.
When the grocery store sets the price of eggs, it does so based on the wholesale price that it's paying, not on the price of some other commodity. Eggs are an interesting example. I bought some at the store just 2 days ago, and yes, they cost me more than they did 5 years ago, but less than they did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, yep. I know we've all experienced that. Now, a report from Health Advisor shows that New Mexico ranks 6th in the nation with the highest weekly average grocery bill of more than $286 per average household in the state. That's in the top 10 for the country on average. But why are grocery trips here around $15 more expensive than, say, a neighboring state like Arizona?
It's hard because we have a smaller population base. And so we have many grocery stores that are in very small communities, and they can't take advantage of buying in bulk. They can't stock what a big store can stock. And the overhead, you have to have a store manager, you have to pay rent, you have to pay the electric bill, and it's spread over a smaller number of customers.
You talk about larger grocery chains versus smaller grocery chains. We've heard in the news recently a proposed merger between the two largest grocery chains in the country. That's Kroger and Albertsons. Kroger, obviously, Smith's here in New Mexico for the most part. Attorney General Raul Torres is opposed to that merger. Several other attorneys general across the country are too. Can you explain the reasons why attorneys general would be opposed to a merger like this, and what should consumers think about it? How does it affect people like you and me?
The reason that attorneys general oppose mergers like that very frequently is because it reduces competition.
Okay.
And competition is something that typically results in lower prices for consumers. So if you have two very large firms merging, the potential is there to have more market power and the ability to raise prices.
Okay. In terms of, from the industry's perspective, what is the benefit for these two chains to create this merger, and what should we think about that?
Typically, in a merger like that, they can eliminate some management positions. Okay. They can combine to put more leverage on their suppliers, lower prices given to them. That's not necessarily passed along to the consumer, and that's what attorney generals get upset about.
Now, also according to that report that I mentioned earlier from Health Advisor, Hispanic and Latino Americans are spending the most each week on groceries on average. Why is that demographic being hurt so much by these price increases?
In part from where they live.
Okay.
In smaller communities, that you can often find communities that are predominantly Hispanic or Latino in New Mexico, in part because neighborhoods in large cities are not served well by the distribution of grocery stores. It is unlikely, I think, that it is because of the particular market basket of goods that Hispanics and Latinos purchase.
Okay. Now, who else in New Mexico is bearing the brunt of these high prices the most? Is it even across the board?
No, it's not even. People on fixed incomes suffer the most from inflation in general, including grocery prices. So that would include most retirees who get a fixed amount of money every month. And if the prices go up, that money buys less. Typically, not always, but typically, those on fixed income don't have high incomes.
Now, taking everything that we just talked about into account, should we expect grocery prices to keep climbing, stay flat, like you mentioned they kind of are right now, or is there any hope of them kind of leveling off to going down in the near future?
I think there's some hope that they will level out. I don't think there's much of a chance that grocery prices will go down much. Selected items might.
Well, Dr. James Peach, thank you so much for being here today on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you, and good luck to you.
Thank you to Dr. Peach for speaking with me. You can watch the entire unedited interview online on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page. Now, as we grapple with high food costs and hold out hope for a slight reprieve from rising grocery bills, a cascading combination of economic realities and a push from our leaders to return to a pre-pandemic lifestyle is causing food insecurity to bleed into more and more households. Right now, according to the nonprofit Feeding America, 1 in 7 New Mexicans faces hunger. That number is even higher for children, with 1 in 5 lacking the resources they need to stay fully fed. It's a problem that's made the already vital community resource of food banks even more important. This week I sit down with Sonia Warwick from Roadrunner Food Bank of New Mexico to ask about the increased need they're seeing and how they're working to keep up. Sonia Warwick, thank you so much for joining me here on New Mexico in Focus.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on. We sure appreciate it and glad to be here and represent the food bank.
Absolutely. Now, we just spoke on the show to an economics professor about rising food prices, their impact on families. In our state, where we're 6th in the country for highest average grocery bill for the average family. Have you seen an increase in the number of people coming to your food bank?
Yes, absolutely. We definitely hear from people when we're out in the community doing food distributions that regularly report to us, like, I'm here because I can't afford food, or I'm here because I can't afford food and rent, or food and my medication, or food and other basic needs that they need access to. And it's driving lots of people back into food lines.
Have you noticed a difference in the economic stability of the people coming? I guess, in other words, are people of more means visiting your food bank trying to get help with their food?
Yeah, I think that's harder to tell, because we're not always asking those kinds of questions. Sure. But in general, I've met people from all walks of life, people from families to single households. We see a lot of seniors in food lines, believe it or not. And here in the state of New Mexico, really it's the 2 most vulnerable populations that we see that are benefiting from services that the food bank provides, children and seniors. So roughly 1 in 5 kids in our state is experiencing hunger. And overall, it's 1 in 7 New Mexicans who's at risk of hunger. So we know it's impacting really the most vulnerable among people that live here.
Now, what beyond rising grocery prices is contributing to that rise in people that are going to your food bank?
Yeah, so the rollback of SNAP benefits about this time last year, we definitely saw an increase as people weren't getting as much of that benefit, and they basically said, like, hey, I've had to return to charitable hunger programs because, yes, I've been able to provide for my family using those SNAP benefits, and it was enough to get them in a place where they felt food secure, that they didn't have to visit charitable hunger programs. But now we see that they need both of those to make ends meet, really, in terms of the amount of meals and the food that they're putting on the table for their loved ones.
How else have operations at Roadrunner changed since the end of the pandemic? I mean, it feels like we're out of it, but now 4 years ago almost.
Yeah, definitely. Well, just like you and I are feeling that pinch at the grocery store, and what we see in terms of food costs, the food bank is too. We definitely have dedicated more and more of our budget over the past few years to strictly buying food. It's one way that we source food, but we also secure food donations and through other means too. And when we're spending more of our budget on that, it means that those dollars that a donor is giving to us don't go as far because costs are much higher for very basic things. And that can be anything from peanut butter, for example, to soups, a variety of different products that we've seen food increases on. And not just like 5 or 10%, sometimes as much as 60%, sometimes as much as 100% compared to even 4 years ago.
Okay. Now, you mentioned donations. Most people know that that's a big way that you guys receive food, but
Yes.
talk a little bit more about how you procure food.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one of the ways that we procure food is through food purchases. We also heavily rely on donations from the community, whether that's people hosting a food drive on our behalf in their neighborhood, in their company, among friends or family. That's another source of food. But two also larger ways that we get food are through, one is federal. There is some federal legislation that funnels it to the state, and the state purchases that food, and then we are charged with distributing that, of the course, in the state of New Mexico into several counties, or actually 16 counties. And then the other way that we secure food is through industry partners, food industry partners specifically. So, think about like a local grocery store who may not be able to sell certain products, but they still have a life to them. We pick up at their stores very often. We can bring it back to the food bank. Volunteers sort that product, and then it gets added to our inventory and then dispersed out into 16 communities that we supply food to.
Now, I know this year's state budget that recently passed included some money for food procurement for organizations like yours.
Yes.
How important is that legislation?
Absolutely vital, right? Because it's strictly for food purchases. That will allow us to complement the inventory that we have on hand. It will allow us to buy product that we may not get as a typical food donation. And it lets us get a variety of different food items that can kind of help complete that meal. People who live in a food insecure situation, if they have their own food budget, they may not necessarily purchase healthier food items because they're not going to last as long. And one of the things that we distribute a significant amount of is things like fresh fruits and vegetables, for example. So having access to those kinds of funds help us complement and make the meal that we're providing to people who are food insecure more well-rounded, more healthy, with protein items and other type of foods that they need for their families to live and thrive.
Now, lastly, on food procurement for your group, I know a lot of that is also at the mercy of Congress. What do you keep an eye on in Washington each year when it comes to the budget?
Definitely right now, there is legislation called the Farm Bill. It's authorized every 5 years. It really sets the spending limits, if you will, for that 5-year period for things like SNAP, for things like commodity food, for that food banks distribute, and that's really known as the Food Emergency the Emergency Food Assistance Program. I'm sorry about that, and then also a senior hunger program. And when we see fluctuations in any of those, that impacts our ability to get more food onto the plates of people who need it. So, when there's fluctuations in people's benefits on SNAP, for example, that can definitely increase the number of people attending food distributions, and also really puts stressors on food banks across the country at a time when we're trying to buy food and trying to get more pounds into our food banks to distribute to people in need. And so when we see this kind of push and pull, we always advocate to make sure the federal nutrition program part of that bill is set at a rate that makes sure people are taken care of who are low income and need that additional help.
Where do things sit right now with this year's Farm Bill?
It's kind of being under consideration. We just had some of our staff in Washington last week advocating for it. So I didn't get the latest update from them before coming here today, but I can tell you it's definitely a priority, not just for our food banks, but communities that receive the food product that we're sending to them, as well as other food banks across the country.
Okay. Now, let's take a short pause and zero in on just a definition. What is food insecurity, and what do people who are facing it have to deal with?
Of course. So, we at our food bank, we tend to use food insecurity and hunger a little bit more interchangeably. It's really a USDA term, but it basically, in the short of it, is basically saying that people don't have enough to make food possible throughout the course of a period of time, usually in the case of a month, but it could be a week, could be over a longer period of time. So when people are facing food insecurity, it means they're not able to procure enough food for their family over the course of a period of time.
Okay. Now, last year, your member organization, Feeding America, released its Map the Meal Gap 2023 report.
Yes.
That details the high rates of child hunger in our state. That's been the case for a long time now, unfortunately. What areas in New Mexico did you find were hit the hardest by child hunger?
Yes, of course. And this is a trend we have seen since that report came out many years ago, but rural hunger. We see a lot of increased hunger in rural communities. And when rural communities also face those increases, it impacts children. Some of them, as much as 30%, can be at risk of experiencing hunger in rural communities. So we know that there is more need often that happens in rural communities than necessarily urban centers or in suburban areas. That doesn't mean there isn't hunger in those areas too. It just means it's probably not quite as deep as other places that tend to have much more rural frontier-like communities that are facing that need and needing more food on the plates of the people in those areas.
Is there a roadmap for addressing the needs in those specific areas?
Yes, we definitely, at least in the last year, we have made an effort to open what we call Healthy Food Express mobile markets. And the concept really is looking at high need communities with low food access. So we operate anywhere from about 9 to 10 of those a month. There's a couple of them here in the urban centers, but most of them primarily are in places like Loving, they're in TRC, they're in Cuba, they're in Torreon, Jemez, for example. So much smaller communities with smaller populations, but may not have access to a fully functional grocery store and rely on those food distributions to make sure that those families are getting healthy food options.
Now, hunger, of course, has been an issue in New Mexico for a long time. What are we missing here, whether legislatively, philosophically within our society? Is there some change that you can imagine that would help us get our arms around this a little bit better?
Yeah, well, hunger is a symptom of poverty, right? You know, they go simultaneously. If you have high rates of poverty, you have high rates of hunger. And it means that we need to do what we have to do as a state to lift people up into that. That can be anything from making sure we're paying living wages to things like we're providing excellent education opportunities for people who are low income. And I think in a state like ours, because of our rural nature and the fact that we have such large spaces in between communities, that can be a tough thing when you're in a small town community and there may not be a lot of higher earning jobs available to you.
Sonia Warwick, thank you so much for joining me here on New Mexico in Focus. Thank you. Thanks again to Sonia Warwick for that interview. Now we join back up with Laura and the New Mexico Forestry Division to hear more about fire and how to live safely and sustainably near forests, especially as insurance companies balk at covering homes in and around forested areas.
So one of the things that I've heard talked about, particularly in places like California, is like indigenous or cultural burning. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be a lot of really cool projects, particularly in Northern California. Is that something that's happening here in New Mexico at all, or that we have agencies have partnerships with tribes on this?
Yeah, so with the Forestry Division, we've started a tribal working group, which has morphed with other partners, our nonprofit partners like TNC New Mexico and the Forest Stewards Guild have joined in and kind of helped move that collaborative group to a larger audience in terms of tribal participation. So, and it's morphed into a tribal wildfire working group where we meet quarterly with usually about 12 tribes across the state and move towards trying to get significant action with wildfire training. Prescribed burning, cultural burning has been a hot topic, and we've even invited through TNC's Indigenous Peoples Burning Network managers to come and give presentations and try and promote cultural burning. We've even invited tribes from California to come and present. There's been numerous workshops and conferences that have recently been held with that focus to try and promote it within the tribes in New Mexico. It's really up to the tribes whether or not they choose to incorporate cultural burning into their actions. a lot of the discussions has been hinged around what that means in terms of their relationship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who has trust response. Well, all federal agencies have the trust responsibility towards tribes, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs manages the wildfire for tribes. And I think tribes are in a phase where they're trying to understand how to navigate cultural burning through the Bureau and what that may mean for them and how they can go about accomplishing that. So it's kind of a conundrum in the sense that there's a training component, but there's also a cultural component. And it's unclear what trumps what, or who is willing to take that leap and maybe start incorporating some of these actions. But there is significant movement towards that, and we're trying to facilitate that with our partners in however way we can, within our authorities and within our funding opportunities that we offer as well.
Okay. So lots of people live in places that are vulnerable to fire. That's like in New Mexico, that is very, very old communities, and it is also new development into the wild and urban interface. And as we see insurance companies pull back, as we see forests getting hotter and drier, are forests a place that humans in New Mexico can continue to live into the future? We'll start with you, Lindsay.
I think there's an interesting dynamic in some of that where we have people that are moving from other places into New Mexico, and a lot of my understanding of why is they like the landscape. They like being out in the woods. That's why they bought the property. That's why they have or want to live close to forests. And so they can sometimes not maybe necessarily understand all the hazards or impacts that may come with living in a wild and urban interface area and intermixing or interfacing with the forest component. And sometimes that is hard to contend against, because wherever they may come from, whatever states may have different laws, different policies, different rules, and they sometimes bring that with them. And that is sometimes hard to contend against in terms of education and outreach. But it really starts with, I think, ambassadors as well at these communities. And if you can get strong ambassadors to encourage homeowners to do something, defensible space, home hardening, fire-wise type tactics and techniques, then I think that can make a difference in living in an interface. But I think it really starts again with education and communication with a lot of people that live in these communities. And I don't think there's necessarily an understanding of the impact from some communities, because maybe it didn't happen to them, it happened in another place, and they can empathize, but they didn't experience it, so they may not necessarily understand why that community is in an uproar, or why there might be that animosity against fires or prescribed burning and things like that, because they didn't experience what others may have experienced. And I'm sure Laura can elaborate more on.
Yeah, well, if you think about the settlement pattern up to about 100 years ago, it was always homes in the valleys and almost always surrounded by fields. And that in and of itself is good fire protection. As well, when our riparian areas or stream areas are functioning well, and there's water in the streams, then there's also water kind of in the valley bottoms that's being held through most of the summer, and which means that you've got kind of a natural pattern of fire breaks across our forested areas of New Mexico. And we've disrupted that both by degrading the streams so that they're dry in the summer, which means that all the moisture is drained out of the marshlands. So it's not going to act like a fire break anymore. And then, as Lindsay described, with more development, people are building not just in the valleys, but up in the forests. And it's lovely until it's not. And so with the recent information around the challenges of getting property insurance in some parts of New Mexico, we've been having some really interesting conversations with the Office of the Superintendent of Insurance and with some of the research institutes that support the insurance industry. And the takeaway is that yes, the home hardening is really important, and home hardening means things like making sure that embers can't get under your eaves, or if you have a wood deck or a wood pile up against your house, or maybe a wooden fence that leads to your house, taking care to put a 5-foot break in there so that, say your fence isn't acting like a wick to bring fire right into your home. And there are things that homeowners can do, and there are a ton of resources online. But what's even more important, what we've learned from the wind-driven wildfires, or what the insurance industry has learned from the wind-driven wildfires, is that neighborhood scale action is what's most important and what has the highest probability of altering fire behavior. And it's challenging to get neighbors to act together. And when I asked the insurance, the president of this research institute, well, what's the policy fix? He didn't have an answer. He said that's yet to be invented. So we're trying to wrap our heads around that and see if we can't come up with something creative in New Mexico that will incentivize neighborhood scale action, but we don't know yet what that's going to look like. And, to listeners, if you live in a neighborhood that is wooded and you can work together with your neighbors, you really should, because that could be what saves your house.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing from both of you is paying attention to your landscape, caring for the place you live, and being in community.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Easy fixes.
Sure.
Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you haven't already, sign up for the Hourland Weekly newsletter. Laura will have even more fire season information and resources in Tuesday's issue. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.